In 1958, the Canadian government flooded 10 towns along the St. Lawrence River, erased 170 years of history, and never apologized to a single family. Today, we are exploring 12 abandoned Canadian places that will give you chills. Stay tuned till the end, because number 1 will blow your mind. Number 12, Walhachin, British Columbia. On dry benchlands above the Thompson River, about 35 kilometers west of Kamloops, concrete irrigation flumes cling to the canyon wall above an almost empty stretch of highway. The town they once supplied has been gone for over 100 years. In 1908, the BC Horticultural Estates Company promoted Walhachin to British gentlemen investors as a desert paradise transformed by engineering. A 30-kilometer irrigation system would water orchards on the benchland. British families arrived, planted fruit trees, built a hotel, a tennis court, and a cricket pitch. In August 1914, virtually every able-bodied man in Walhachin enlisted for the First World War. The women who remained could not maintain the irrigation system alone. A flash flood destroyed a section of the flume in 1915. By 1922, the orchards were dead, and the settlement was empty. The concrete flume is still visible on the canyon wall above. Standing on that sun-baked hillside, looking at infrastructure built for a future that ended in the mud of Flanders, the distance between what was planned and what actually happened feels very small and very final. Number 11, Grosse Ile, Quebec. In the St. Lawrence River, about 50 kilometers downstream from Quebec City, a small island held the entry point into Canada for millions of immigrants between 1832 and 1937. Every ship entering the St. Lawrence stopped here for inspection before passengers could continue inland. In ordinary years, the system was manageable. 1847 was not an ordinary year. The Irish famine sent 100,000 people across the Atlantic in overcrowded, disease-ridden ships. Typhus spread below decks. Ships arrived faster than the station could process them. At the height of the crisis, more than 40 vessels sat anchored in the river, with people dying on the water before reaching shore. At least 5,424 people died on the island or in the river that summer. The real number is believed to be higher. They were buried in mass graves in the fields above the water. Today, Grosse Ile is a National Historic Site, reachable by ferry. The Celtic Cross Memorial stands on its highest point. The mass graves are still beneath the grass. On a quiet summer day, the island looks almost pastoral. Then you look at the field and understand that it is not a field. Number 10, Val Jalbert, Quebec. At the base of the 72-meter Ouiachuan Falls near Lac Saint-Jean, a complete 1920s company town stands in a state of preservation that is almost unsettling. Not a restoration. The buildings are simply still there, exactly as they were left. A pulp mill opened in 1901, and a full company town grew around it. Worker housing, a convent, a church, a general store, a school. By the early 1920s, Val Jalbert had roughly 950 residents. In 1927, newer industrial technology made the operation uneconomical. The company closed and issued notice. Within a year, every resident was gone. Val Jalbert is now a provincial historic park. Walking the residential streets past houses with curtains still in their windows and a convent school that looks like class just let out, the word abandoned does not quite fit. Paused comes closer. Number 9, Bent's, Saskatchewan. About 80 kilometers south of Swift Current, a cluster of empty foundations and a listing grain elevator mark the place where a farming community once believed they were building something permanent. Bent's was settled in 1910 under the federal homestead program. By 1928, the town had a post office, a church, a school, a general store, and a community hall. Wheat harvests in good years were strong enough to sustain optimism. The drought began in 1929 and did not fully release the region until 1937. Topsoil that had developed across centuries blew off in black blizzards that turned the daytime sky dark. Crops failed 8 years in a row. Families ate gophers. Children went hungry. The people of Bent's did what people across the southern prairies did. They left. Almost nothing remains. The land is farmed again, but nothing has been rebuilt. Standing where Bent's used to be, with the wind moving unobstructed across 50 kilometers of flat horizon, you feel the full weight of betting everything on weather. Number 8. SS Baichimo, Beaufort Sea. In October 1931, the Hudson's Bay Company steamship SS Baichimo was caught in early pack ice off the Alaska coast. A rescue plane extracted the 36-member crew. The HBC declared the ship a total loss and left her. The Baichimo did not sink. She drifted crewless through the Beaufort Sea with her cargo of furs still aboard. Inuit hunters boarded her multiple times over the following years to shelter from storms. She was sighted repeatedly, always empty, always moving. Her last confirmed sighting was in 1969, 38 years after she was abandoned. No wreck has ever been located. The Alaska state government formally requested international assistance in finding her in 2006. Nothing was found. There are men who sailed the Beaufort Sea in the 1940s and 1950s who reported seeing a vessel on the horizon that would not hold its position and then vanished into fog. They knew which ship it was. I hope you are enjoying this video so far. Why not give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves Canadian history? It would mean a lot. Now, let us continue with our countdown. Number 7. Clo'us, British Columbia. On the outer coast of Vancouver Island, about 75 kilometers southwest of Port Alberni, the small settlement of Clo'us sits where the Chihuahua River meets the Pacific. There is no road. There has never been a road. Non-Indigenous settlers arrived around 1895, drawn by the mild climate and the salmon. By 1910, the community had a post office and a one-room school. The postal service ran by rowboat. At its peak, 60 to 80 residents lived at Clo'us in a self-sufficiency that only develops when the nearest town is a full day's travel. For a while, that isolation was a feature. Over time, it became a sentence. One family at a time, Clo'us emptied. By the 1960s, it was effectively gone. Clo'us is now a stop on the West Coast Trail. Arriving after 2 days on the trail and looking at a clearing where a community chose isolation, until isolation became impossible, you understand both why they stayed as long as they did and why they finally had to go. Number 6. Port Union, Newfoundland. On the northeast coast of the Bonavista Peninsula. Port Union is a town that was not discovered but designed. Built from the ground up by the most consequential labor organizer in Newfoundland history. In 1916, William Ford Coker, president of the Fishermen's Protective Union, constructed Port Union as the world's first union-owned town. It had a fish plant, a union store, a dry dock, a theater, and company housing. It was an argument in wood and mortar that fishermen deserved a life with dignity. The collapse of the cod fishery was slow and then total. By the time the federal government issued the Northern Cod Moratorium in July 1992, ending an industry that had sustained Newfoundland for 500 years, Port Union had already been hollowing out for years. The plant closed. The young people left. Port Union is now a National Historic Site. The population is around 400. Walking the waterfront past buildings raised by principle as much as by labor. The scale of what Coker attempted and the scale of what was taken from this coastline both feel present at the same time. Number 5. Uranium City, Saskatchewan. On the north shore of Lake Athabasca, about 750 kilometers north of Saskatoon, a town that once held 5,000 people now has fewer than 100. The hospital is closed. The bowling alley is a shell. The streets are wider than the remaining population will ever need. Uranium City was built in the early 1950s by Eldorado Nuclear Limited to support uranium mines fueling Cold War demand. The government built it completely. Schools, a movie theater, hotels, daily air service connecting it to the south. In 1982, Eldorado Nuclear closed its primary operation. Other mines followed. The government offered subsidized flights south for anyone who wanted to leave. Most people took the flights. The buildings remain. A small permanent community, largely indigenous, continues to live there. Walking through a town purpose-built by a government and then abandoned the moment the resource was exhausted, you feel something that has a specific quality. The coldness of being treated as a means rather than as people. Number 4. Sandon, British Columbia. At the end of a 13-kilometer dirt road in the Slocan Valley, the Silver City of the Slocan sits in a narrow mountain canyon where Carpenter Creek now runs directly through what used to be the main street. Silver was discovered near Sandon in 1891, and within 3 years, a full city had materialized in the mountains. At its peak, around 1898, Sandon had roughly 5,000 residents, 24 hotels, 23 saloons, 2 newspapers, an electric lighting system, and a red light district. It was one of the richest and most lawless towns in the BC interior. A fire destroyed most of it in 1900. The town rebuilt. In May 1955, Carpenter Creek flooded and tore through the rebuilt town, carrying off buildings and bridges. What the fire hadn't taken, the creek finished. A handful of structures remain, and a seasonal museum operates out of a surviving building. The creek now runs through the middle of where the streets once were, and the mountains above look exactly as they did when the first prospector walked in under them. Number 3. Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. In Cumberland County, about 180 kilometers northwest of Halifax, the town of Spring Hill sits above a coal seam that produced both wealth and grief across 70 years of mining. Coal mining began in 1872, drawing workers from across maritime Canada and from Britain. By the early 20th century, the mines employed most of the adults in a town of around 6,000 people. 3 disasters defined Spring Hill, each worse than the one before. An explosion in 1891 killed 125 men and boys. A second explosion in 1956 killed 39. And on October 23, 1958, a sudden catastrophic shift in rock pressure collapsed the deepest workings of the No. 2 colliery and killed 75 men in seconds. 19 survivors were pulled from the darkness after 6.5 days underground, kept alive by tapping on pipes. A second group of 12 was found alive after 8.5 days. The mines never reopened. The Spring Hill Miners Museum tells the full story on the site of the 1891 explosion. Walking past the 1958 memorial with 75 names carved into it, there is a weight in the air that has no more precise name than grief. Number 2. Atlin, British Columbia. In the far northwestern corner of British Columbia, about 185 kilometers southeast of Whitehorse, the town of Atlin sits at the edge of a lake so cold and clear it looks painted. Gold was discovered near Atlin in July 1898 at the tail end of the Klondike Rush, and a stampede followed. Within a year, roughly 3,000 people occupied what had been wilderness: banks, hotels, newspapers, a courthouse, churches. Millions of dollars in gold moved through Atlin in its first years. What else moved through was violence. Chinese miners who arrived during the rush were subjected to organized expulsion by white miners and business owners in 1899 and 1900. Groups of workers were forcibly driven off their claims. No one responsible was ever charged with any offense. Today, Atlin has roughly 400 residents and one of the most intact collections of Gold Rush-era buildings in Canada. Atlin is one of the most beautiful places in this country and one of the most complicated, and both of those things are visible from the lakeshore at once. Number 1. The Lost Villages of Ontario. In 1954, the Canadian and American governments agreed to deepen the St. Lawrence River and build the largest navigable inland waterway on Earth. The St. Lawrence Seaway required a dam. The dam required a reservoir. The reservoir required land. 10 communities in eastern Ontario stood directly in the flood zone. Their names were Long Sault, Altsville, Farrens Point, Dickinson's Landing, Wales, Meals Roches, Moulinet, Maple Grove, Woodlands, and Sheik's Island. Several had stood since Loyalist settlers arrived in the 1780s. Some families had lived on the same land for 5 and 6 generations. Together, the 10 towns held approximately 6,500 people. In 1955, residents received notices giving them months, not years. Houses were physically relocated by truck to 2 newly constructed towns built to receive them. Some churches were moved. Some cemeteries were exhumed. Others were not. On July 1st, 1958, a date the Commission named Inundation Day, the cofferdams were opened. The water rose over streets, over foundations, over graves that had not been moved, over the places where people had been born and baptized and buried across 170 years of continuous community life. More than 500 homes, 6 churches, 3 schools, and 2 town halls disappeared permanently beneath the St. Lawrence. Residents received compensation set at the assessed value of their properties. They received nothing for the communities themselves, nothing for the generations of history that went under the water, and nothing for the graves the province decided were not worth relocating. No government has ever apologized. The Mohawk communities of Akwesasne, whose territory borders the project area, and who were not meaningfully consulted before construction began, also lost land and ancestral access to their river. That loss has received even less acknowledgement. Today you can stand at the waterline near Ingleside and look out at the St. Lawrence above where the towns once stood. On very still, very clear days. From a boat above the old town sites, the outline of foundation stones is sometimes visible beneath the surface. The people who were displaced have formed their own historical societies, published their own records, and kept their own memory alive, because the country that flooded their homes has not consistently chosen to do it for them. Standing at the water's edge above 10 drowned towns, you understand something about this country that its official histories have taken a long time to say plainly. Canada has a pattern of deciding whose places matter and whose can be covered over and forgotten. The water does not distinguish. It simply rises and covers everything equally. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Make sure to share it with your friends, and see you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys through Canada's hidden and forgotten places.